Whatever that means.
Right, I spoke today, he's going to put that video in the December's magazine. You get me free? Yeah.
Chief Security Officer.
Welcome to the Royal Engineers Museum today. Lovely day for it. The piper was excellent, really good turnout. Now we're here, as you know, today to open the rock gallery in the museum in commemoration of Lieutenant Colonel John Rock and all his achievements. Before we do that, I'd just like to say one or two thank yous which have made this the final version of this possible. And firstly, I think it was back in 2001, 2002, when the Airborne Engineers Association actually donated the first, or made a grant of the first £1,600 in order to get this thing moving. But of course, money doesn't do it all. And without the incredible enthusiasm and efforts of volunteers who actually do all the work and get these things together, it just wouldn't have happened. And for that, the main mover and shaker was Nick Gibson, who I see standing just in front of us. Nick, thank you very much for all that. But Nick didn't do it all on his own. He was very ably supported and is still being supported by John Stubbs, who's doing the modelling for us. John, thank you very much. Now, in Nick's fundraising activities, in order to raise the sufficient funds for it, because it's amazing how expensive these things are. The mannequins and the like cost an absolute arm and a leg. He republished Major John Shade's book, Go For It, and that raised, I believe, about £1,000 extra, and is still raising money. And I'm sure you all bought a copy of it. And of course, if you didn't, we can sell you some, because we've got some through in the coffee room available for you. So I don't want to see anyone leave without a copy or proof that they've read it. Last year, the association put the final bit of money towards it, which actually enabled it all to come together. The final people to thank really is the director of the museum, Richard Dunn, and the curator, Rebecca Cheney, who cooperated and worked with Nick in order to make all this happen. Richard and Rebecca, thank you very much. If I can now hand over to and introduce General Peter Wall, who most of you I suspect know anyway, to do the opening. General.
Paratroopers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you. It's a slightly nerve-wracking moment for me. My first troop staff sergeant is glaring at me from the ranks, wondering what's about to happen going on. It took Nick about as long to produce the display here through some fairly tricky fundraising and everything else. It took about the same time as it took John Rock and others to raise 5,000 paratroopers and commitment operations in the early part of the 1940s right through till the Arnhem and the Rhine Crossing operations. And of course, we mustn't forget that this very morning is the 61st anniversary of the first drops into Arnhem, and it's very proud for all of us here to know that sitting in the front rank here are many who took part not only in Arnhem but in other operations from North Africa right the way through to the Far East 60 odd years ago. So the first thing I think is to pay tribute to you all, and thank you very much for being here and for what you've done. I think every sapper here, and others as well, but there are some people from the Reg here, we have to admit, would recognise that this museum is phenomenal. It's a fantastic record of the achievements of so many of our forebears and operations going back centuries. It's a wonderful way of informing the wider public of what sappers are all about. And of course it's an inspiration to those who are either in the Corps or maybe about to join the Corps and see themselves doing various things operationally. Probably in some slightly stranger places now than we used to think about 5 or 10 years ago. Afghanistan, Iraq, and all that sort of thing. And of course, I Squadron had quite a number of their number in southern Iraq this very morning. And the John Rock display here is no exception. And of course, it does provide an immense insight into what airborne engineers specifically have done since the 1940s. And again, it's interesting to reflect that probably 15, 20 years ago, some people sought to purport this as a dying breed. But we now have an Airborne Engineer Regiment. They don't call it that quite, but that's what it is. In the form of 2-3 Engineer Regiment Air Assault, based at Water Beach, part of 16 Air Assault Brigade. And I suppose you could say that in terms of technology, the Airborne Engineer art, the Airborne art, is getting back onto another peak, rather like the peak that John Rock established with others through all his amazing work in the early 1940s, when it really was harnessing cutting-edge technology to get people parachuting and glider-borne into battle. With that very specific ethos, born of the fact that people were going from situations of being back in the UK or in forward mountain bases, essentially in a 100% peacetime environment, and finding themselves very few hours later in a 100% wartime environment. And I think that's the thing that's driven the ethos, and it lives on now because the new technology that's available after, I think, many years in the technical doldrums is the advent of the action helicopter, which gives a whole new sense of purpose, credibility and opportunity to the airborne business. So thinking about John Rock himself, of course, I don't think there's anybody here who knew him or met him, but I may be wrong. I'm looking at the front row here. And he's clearly a very private man, because not a massive amount seems to be known about him, except what he achieved, which he did in a very imaginative, innovative and committed way. And we've heard how when the first parachutists were being killed on impact through parachute malfunctions, he was the first man to put on the next parachute to reinstate the morale of people who were at that sort of slightly dubious point in their existence we've all been through on occasion, about to make their first parachute descent. And anybody who claims they can't remember their first parachute descent, well, that's question there. The powers of memory and memory. And most of us remember our last as well. I hope that it was. Anyway, back to John Ross. A remarkable man and extremely fitting that 64 or 5 years after he achieved his great deeds, he should be remembered here as one of the great innovators, following a line of other sappers who've done all sorts of things over the centuries, which have given birth to organisations like the Royal Air Force and that sort of thing, which we work well on. So I think without any further ado, I will ask Derek to open the new John Rock and Airborne Engineer display here in the museum. I wish that I was pressing a switch for some sort of detonator to explode the barrier. Sadly, it's not the case. He's going to put it to one side, and I hereby declare the John Rock display open.
Flash reflecting back. If you can bring any pressure there, yes, you want to do some funds for the remainder. I see what you mean about where would you hang the portrait, yeah? Yeah. But still, if we can get two more of these for 2-3 hours, so like that, we'll carry on. I think so, yes. Oh, does it? Oh, my Lord. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you so much. Cheers. God bless you.
Email.